Red t-shirt, alien workshop. See the infected little monkey with all the little radio frequencies beaming out of his dome? I got a love letter from God last night, and I wrote what I remembered of it today. And the reason for this is so that you might pick up the phone and ask her to the dance yourself and start the relationship and the dialogue and the rapport with God yourself. And I'm going to be speaking in more open and direct terms in some of these videos about how I do have an open dialogue with God. It's mostly a monologue. I do a lot more listening than speaking. But it's not so that you'll tune in to me for the latest incoming message from the big giant head. It's so that you'll open the line of communication yourself. And in order that you might know how to do that, God relayed to me a very understandable and relatable experience that we've all had. A relationship between a man and a woman. From the time you're young, puppy dog love as teenagers, right up to the point of marriage. I understood a lot of the easily able to superimpose one over the other and how there is a correspondence and a correlation between these two relationships. The one you've been familiar with your whole life, whether you're a man or a woman, you've been on one end or the other of that relationship dynamic. And for that reason, this is going to be easily relatable and understandable. So, for the remainder of this video, I'll be referring to God as a woman for the most part. But if you're a woman, you've been on the other end of this relationship dynamic I'm about to describe. And you know what it's like to be the girl in that relationship, but I'm going to speak of it from the man's point of view. Start with a couple of bullet points, but then I'm going to just read right through this letter that I wrote this morning. It took me about an hour and a half to write this thing down, and it kind of just flowed pretty seamlessly. So some of the bullet points are the Romeo test. Women often, well, I should just say where I got it from. It was one of these self-help seminars for women on how to manipulate men and get them wrapped around your finger, or how to filter them out and find the good ones and separate the wheat from the chaff. And one technique, is the Romeo test. And on this CD it said to the woman to come up with fabricate a scenario, manufacture a scenario where you need help and you need him to come to the rescue. Don't make it something he can't do. If he's not a mechanic, don't say my car's broke down, or he'll just go, I don't know how to work on cars. You need to call AAA. You need to make sure it's something he's able to do, and make sure he's willing to drop everything he's doing in the moment to come help you out when you need help. Romeo, Romeo, where art thou, Romeo? I'm broke down on the side of the road. Whatever it is, come up with a scenario that you can pitch to him to see if he'll drop everything he's doing and come help you. And if not, then he fails the Romeo test. This relationship with God is one of free will. And it has to be. God could not impose himself or herself upon us, and would not even if they could, because it would be counterproductive to the natural development of the relationship. For instance, prearranged marriages in places like India, where one family marries off their son and daughter to each other at 5 years old and signs the marriage certificate when they're not even old enough to know what the hell marriage is. And as they grow up, they hear, oh, you're married to so-and-so. Oh, really? Oh, okay. That's not of free will. That's an aberration to the natural development of the relationship between the man and the woman. Likewise, baptism of young children at 8 years old is much the same thing. You're signing a marriage contract between that child and God, and they grow up to learn that they're already married to this God that you've married them to. That's not how the relationship naturally develops, and it doesn't create the mutual love and respect, appreciation, and admiration that occurs if that relationship develops naturally. So, God, she wants to know that she's the last thing that you think about before bed and the first thing you think of when you wake up. She wants late night phone calls that last into the early morning, where you mostly listen and hang on her every word, fascinated by this amazing, beautiful, mystical, magical creature. People used to miss God and yearn for God and long for God's return, performing dances and singing songs, adorning themselves and their houses with plumage and baubles and jewels to attract and invite God to come live with them. showing that they have the greatest desire and willingness and ability to serve her and protect and provide and raise her kids. She wants commitment, passion, and courage. She now rarely receives even so much as a phone call asking her out on a date, a poem, or a love song from anybody. She wants to know that that passion to please and satisfy and impress her won't die out upon marriage. That you'll show undying devotion and effort to win her respect, approval, and admiration for the rest of our days. She is a jealous God, and she wants to know that you no longer have eyes that lust for others now that you've found her. And yes, good girls like bad boys. She wants to harness and tame and ride your wild horses and smooth out your rough edges, but never so much as to extinguish that young and free spirit of wild and crazy reckless abandon that made her fall head over heels in love with you. There is never a power struggle of decision-making within this healthy marriage, because both parties know and trust that the other is equally committed to their well-being and working toward the plan of mutual happiness, willing to commit, contribute, and sacrifice everything to that end, willing to live every moment of every day for the other half, to uplift and sustain them or die trying. That also applies to the parent-child love relationship, and I'll make one other reference to the parent-child love relationship here in a moment, but for the most part, this is the man-woman. When God says yes to your proposal and chooses you to the exclusion of all other men, acknowledging she prefers to be in your company and believes in your vow, commitment, willingness, and ability to care for her and her offspring based on your demonstration and display and showcase of your core characteristics that are the fiber of your being, qualities and traits that she would like to preserve and reproduce within her own children, you will spend the rest of your life trying not to disappoint her in that decision that she made. And the opportunity cost, we'll discuss that in a moment, that she incurred in the making of that decision. She can see through you right to the core of your inner being. She knows what you're made of, the content of your character, the tensile strength of your personal constitution, the sincerity of your appeal and desire for her approval, the true intentions of each of her suitors. She is never fooled by the fraud, by the facade and the charade of here today, gone tomorrow, fleeting impulses of those who just want to get laid. She's also got a sense of humor there, if you see. The opportunity cost. There is a limited amount of time left until departure, and a limited amount of seating and housing aboard the mothership. So call her now and ask her to the dance, or if you've been dating for a while, then ask for her hand in holy matrimony, because she won't wait around forever. You ain't getting any younger, and if you keep playing the field until you're over the hill, you'll miss out on the opportunity of a lifetime. God convinced the world that she didn't exist to see what you would do when you thought no one was looking. And every time that you helped someone do what they could not do for themselves in their time of need, you won her over just a little and set her heart aflutter. When you expected no reward, acknowledgement, or appreciation for your good deed, but you chose to do it anyway so that you would know that you did the right thing, it made her heart sing. You are the wind beneath her wings, like a child is the apple of their parents' eye, and their growth and success is the object of their parents' desire. That love is the force that propels the expansion and continuity of the universe. You are the reason she makes the world go round. Like a single mother who waits tables at a restaurant all day so she can feed her kids at night, you are her inspiration to set the alarm clock and wake up and do it all again the next day. Little shout out to my mom there. Hell hath no fury like that of a woman scorned. She must choose wisely by sifting through her suitors, the wheat and the tares, separating the wheat from the chaff, and eliminating those who would betray her love, reversing the forward motion of the universe for generations to come. She must avoid those who those whose passion and love would become passive, lukewarm, taking the blessing of her presence in their life for granted and thereby slowing or stalling the forward motion of the universe. Only after a prolonged courtship process, where the suitor is analyzed and assessed from different angles and dimensions, and to greater depths than he is even aware of or can comprehend, through his demonstration of allegiance and fidelity to principles that are made evident by his practiced standards of behavior, only after he humbly submits his will to serve her for the rest of his life, with the acknowledgement that there are many other suitors with far greater prospects than he, and only after he pronounces his love for her and eternal gratitude and appreciation that he would feel for the rest of his days if she would find him worthy of reciprocating that love, warts and all, with all of his shortcomings, that she must overlook to find him as adorable and admirable as he finds her, only then, through grace and not by his works, might she choose to grant him passage into her future family and household. It is by grace that she may choose to accept his proposal, because regardless of the lengths he may have went to during the courtship, the mountains of good deeds and heroic efforts and fortunes spent on extravagant attempts to showcase and highlight his finer points as a potential prospect, the final choice is hers to make. He still has to make her laugh, make her smile, be the rock of emotional stability when she feels all hope is lost and there is nothing left worth fighting for or caring about. Be her hope for a better tomorrow when today looks so bleak. Be her partner who is not worried about making it through the storm, because with her by his side, he just wants to dance in the rain, with this feeling that whenever she is near, then everything is great. She makes the grass seem greener, the sky a more brilliant blue, and even bitter experiences of pain and suffering, loss and sorrow seem much sweeter when I'm with you. Endurance of life's trials and tribulations feel well worth it, and a small price to pay for another day in this world with you by my side. You make me want to be a better man. I like me better when I'm with you. You give my life purpose, meaning, and direction, and even when I feel lost, as long as you're by my side, there is no desired destination because I've already arrived, and all I want is to savor every moment of this journey with you. I like to think that you intentionally lost the map so I would focus my attention on you, here and now, and stop worrying about where we are or making it out of the woods or to some final destination. With God in my heart, the journey is the destination, and I don't ever want it to end. The idea of blasphemy, and the way people rail against it, is like protecting and defending and preserving her honor and dignity against any who would defile her character by speaking ill of her without respect. Fiercely defending and cherishing the love that she shares with all of her children. To, quote, make a respectable woman out of her, which is a phrase that people use when they talk about marriage. They say, when are you going to marry that girl, put a ring on her finger, when are you going to make a respectable woman out of her? To make a respectable woman out of her is to put a ring on her finger and on your own, to say to the world that you are no longer on the market looking for love, a soulmate, and a life partner by proudly announcing your commitment to this one love that fulfills all of your desires and has redirected your efforts from searching to serving. Proclaiming that I've found the one who makes me feel better than I ever imagined I could or thought that I ever deserved. I've finally found the love of a lifetime, and I will spend the rest of this life nurturing our relationship and strengthening our bond, getting to know and understand each other in deeper and more meaningful ways and levels of intimacy by opening myself up and making myself vulnerable in ways I've not yet felt comfortable and secure and trusting enough to do with any other. In this process, I will come to know myself in greater depth and detail and come to know what it is that she sees in me in order to love myself in the way that she loves me. Dropping my defenses and asking God to come into my heart has opened up a whole new world to me. And she is waiting by the phone, hoping you will call and ask her to the dance. wondering if you're thinking about her, daydreaming about your future together, the new family you might have together, and all of the wonderful adventures you may enjoy together, and all of the ways that you are such an amazing person who doesn't even see how amazing you really are, and all of the ways she could help you learn to love and trust again without fear of rejection or judgment or being found unworthy. If only you would get up the nerve and courage to make yourself vulnerable. As clumsy, awkward, and unfamiliar as it may seem at first, just pick up the receiver, dial the number, and say hello. And the rest of the process will flow naturally and seamlessly. Picking up the receiver is opening your heart. Dialing the number is speaking out loud to God as you understand them and addressing them by whatever moniker you feel most comfortable using. Saying hello is an announcement that you are presently focusing your attention upon this open line of communication and would like a response from the party on the other end of the line to acknowledge that you have successfully made the connection and that they too are presently focused upon this open line of communication. The conversation proceeds from there, and like most girls, she wants you to do more listening than talking, and be more interested in finding out about her than telling her about yourself. Because God already knows everything about you, including each thought that might come to mind before you even put it into words. So let God do most of the talking. So that was the end of the love letter, and I'm going to add now a couple of addendums. Don't wait until you run into her and say, oh, hey, baby, I was going to call you. Yeah, I was going to call you. Just the other day, I was thinking about you. I was going to call you. Don't wait till you run into her around town. You know the awkward scenario I'm talking about. Oh, hey, I was going to call you. Don't even think about it. If you see her and you haven't called her, don't even try that shit. I got a note here about the third ear. You hear a lot of people talking about opening up your third eye. I open up my third ear. That sounds much more alien, doesn't it? A third ear? That almost sounds like a monster with 3 heads. That's how I open up the line of communication. I open up my third ear. And as long as I'm in a feeling space of wanting to receive and communicate with, which is all pretty much a monologue coming from God to me, it opens up naturally every time. Are you there? Yep, I'm here, of course, as always. Oh, okay. And as I've said many a times, this started for me by a very sincere, heartfelt prayer to Jesus Christ, asking for the Nineveh reprieve for all of us, that we might be able to come to understand that the Bible was a blueprint in order that we may not be judged and held accountable for the monsters that were created and sent over to Syria. Google ISIS Army of 7-footers if you don't know what I'm talking about. And from there, that very night, it all started to unfold for me. Realities I knew it began to unravel and has continued to unravel ever since. And the reason I say call out to God using whatever moniker you know, in AA they talk about finding a higher power and speaking to God as we understand Him. And while I was sitting in AA, I've heard people switch out the word her. Come to know God as we've come to understand her. Because that opens it up to other people who have a different concept of God, that they can superimpose this understanding and this knowledge on their own concept of God. Pretty sure God's got more than one phone number. Jesus Christ is just a call sign. Breaker 19, breaker 19. You copy? That's all it is. It's a call sign that I want to be on the good side of this thing that's going down with the supernatural forces that are in play. Sign me up, Jesus Christ. I want to be on that team, on the good team. But I'm pretty sure God has more than one call sign, more than one phone number. You can pick up that receiver and dial the number in whatever way you feel most comfortable doing. Do it sincerely from the heart, and it'll happen. Because God knows your heart. And God knows the superficial people that are just looking to get laid. Just going through the motions and reciting some words ain't going to do it. and I talked about how there's never any power struggle of who gets to make the decisions or who has to make the decisions in this relationship between you and God. While relating it to a human relationship between a man and a woman, I said there's no power struggle or decision-making conflict. Because, just like in a healthy human relationship, both of you know your strengths and weaknesses and how the other would be better suited to make this decision. And God leaves it up to you and me a lot of time to make those decisions and decide the right action. For instance, while I was at the sacrament meeting the other day, I heard this lady relaying an experience that she had while she was talking with her husband about asking the Holy Spirit and whether or not you receive a response and what the response was, and sometimes he received no response. And he said to her, have you ever asked the Holy Spirit for a response and received no response? She said, yeah. And he said, when? She said, when it came to marrying you. God left that decision up to her. Probably so she wouldn't blame God if it went the wrong way. God's got his or her or their own reasons for leaving it up to you and allowing you or insisting that you make the decision and take the action. Because you can see things from the ground level, they can't. They can see a lot more from the area level that you can't. But you're God's hand in this world, and the hand doesn't work well without the brain, so you need to ask God in as many cases as possible for any guidance and direction that you may be able to receive before moving your hand. But sometimes God's going to say, you're the hand. You got to make the decision. You got to take the action. And I trust that our relationship is close enough. Once you tune your spirit to God's, there's very little space between your will and God's will. That's why sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not I'm just thinking in my head or if it's God speaking to me and through me. But as I practice this, it becomes much easier and easier to know when it's definitely God. Last night, for instance, I was receiving confirmation during revelation. I've spoken before about confirmation after revelation, like you receive the revelation, and then you have to act on it, and then later on you get the confirmation that you indeed were acting on revelation that was received. But you got to act on it first before you get the confirmation, and that's where faith comes in. And the reason you don't get confirmation as soon as you get the revelation in order to go forth with action is in order to build that faith and that trust and that knowing that when you heard God, you really did hear God. If God confirmed it right after she said it, then you wouldn't have developed that knowing and that trust that when you hear God, that's what you're hearing is God. But last night, while I was sitting out looking at the sky, I was receiving confirmation during revelation, like during this hour-and-a-half monologue where I sat back and listened and was just amazed by all the ways that she related to me, how our relationship is very much like a human relationship, and it's built a little bit at a time, and all the different ways that you can superimpose some of the same things in a human relationship with a relationship with God. It's got to be voluntarily. God can't force himself or herself upon us. Otherwise, it would not foster that loving, trusting relationship that develops over time when you naturally go to God and find God yourself and make the phone call and say, hey, you want to go to the dance? If it's a prearranged marriage and you grow up knowing this is your husband or wife, I don't know, I haven't studied prearranged marriages or culture of India very much, but I suspect love, true love, deep love, takes a different form. It's a bit twisted. It goes down an unnatural path with this prearranged marriage. Same thing with baptizing your kid when they're 8 years old and they grow up finding out that they've already been signed on through this contract, a contractual marriage agreement to God through this baptism that they've been through. In the Mormon church, they say 8 years old, you're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, and therefore from that point forward, you're responsible for all of your own behavior, and that's why they baptize you at 8 years old. Personally, I think that would be destructive to the actual ability for someone to develop a relationship with God, because A, they take it for granted, B, they weren't old enough to actually know anything about God or life and the nature of our existence at 8 years old. And if you were forced into a wedding, a marriage, it may actually make you resistant to finding the real God. Like if someone forced themselves upon you and it created a trauma for you, like a woman that got with an abusive relationship, it makes her unable to trust men thereafter. Like rape, as I said, rape is a way of forcing this relationship in an unnatural way that does not foster love. So is a prearranged marriage. So is baptism at 8 years old.
So
and
is
if
the
you have
Santa
that forced
psyop.
upon you, it is probably much less likely that you're going to be willing to open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable to the control that you felt was placed upon you by that.
The Santa psyop breaks a kid's heart and makes them just as untrusting and unwilling to make themselves vulnerable to that guy in the sky who knows when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake.
Relationship that you were forced into, just like a woman who's been traumatized by a man who abused her, unable to trust men thereafter. In a relationship with God, I suspect it's very much the same thing. Those who have been indoctrinated from birth and baptized and just told that this is who you're married to and this is the God that you're married to, probably are a little bit apprehensive to actually try to find God and actually develop a real relationship with God after they've been in one that was forced upon them. Likewise with marriage in India, what's the likelihood of divorce in one of these prearranged marriages? What's the likelihood of real love developing in one of these prearranged marriages? In the Amish community, they have this thing where I think it's at 17 years old, the teenager is allowed to go out in the regular real world and experience the real world for themselves for like 6 months or a year or something, and then decide whether or not they want to come back and live with the Amish community in our way of life or stay out there in the real world. That's like in a prearranged marriage in India, saying, oh, once you're 25, you get to go date again, and you can go date men and have sex with men and decide whether or not you want to be with me, even though we were prearranged marriage since we were 5 years old. Likewise with this Amish year of exploration of the real world after you've already been married to the Amish community and their way of life and their God for a year when you're already grown. It's like after you've already had 2 kids in that prearranged marriage, you're allowed to go date for a year and then decide whether or not you want to come back to the family life and continue being mom of these 2 kids and my wife. So this relationship with God has a lot of similarities and parallels with the growth and development of the relationship between a man and woman. And just like when you're young, making that phone call and asking the girl to the dance is one of the most nerve-wracking things. You got to work up the nerve, you got to work up the courage, the fear of rejection. I'll be speaking in these terms more directly and openly without the fear of alienation, because when you say that you're hearing from these off-world entities, I've thought about this a little bit more in the last 24 hours. Because God wants me to let you know that it's okay so that you'll call God, so that you'll pick up the phone and you'll ask her to the dance and you'll develop your own relationship with her. Not so that you'll tune into me for the latest incoming message from the big giant head. Whether it's aliens or God, whether God's a man or a woman. Oh, by the way, as I said, people used to miss God, long for God, miss God, and wonder when God's coming back. Like a woman whose man went off to war and she thinks about him every day when she wakes up till the time she goes to bed and prays that he'll come home safely. People used to miss God and love God in that way, in such a deep yearning and longing for a reconnection with God, that they would create these elaborate dances and ceremonies and rituals and adorn themselves with baubles and plumage, and much like the courtship process, whether it's in the wild, the bird with all the feathers trying to impress the female bird by flexing his plumage and shaking his moneymaker and trying to win her over and her approval. Because for a woman, there is a greater cost, an opportunity cost. She can only choose one mate. A man can go around and impregnate 100 women. A woman can only be impregnated by one man, or at least one in a year. This is called evolutionary psychology. And that's why for women, there's much more of an emotional connection to sex. And for men, it can just be a wham, bam, thank you, man, physical aspect. But if it is, you're missing out on the opportunity of a lifetime. Because it's that first holding of the hand when you're at the movie theaters and you slide your hand over and you grab their hand and your heart starts to flutter. God wants to know that your heart flutters and races when you think about her. and that you're thinking about her all day, every day. And she's sitting at home waiting for you to call and ask her to dance. And she's flipping her hair and wondering if he's thinking about me. Wondering if he's with that other bitch. Because I don't want to have to lay him to waste. I kind of like that dude. But if he's with that other girl, then he signed on to the wrong God. And I'm going to have to lay him to waste. And that brings me to the urgency of this message. She ain't going to wait around forever. Make your move, or she going to be with someone else. The gods that are here now are not going to be here forever. When they go, they're gone. And like I said, there's not an unlimited amount of space on the mothership. Just like the movie 2012, when there were those ships that took off, everyone thought they were getting a ticket on the ship who was in on the building of them and this and that and the other, but there was only so much room on those ships. There's a limited amount of time, and there may or may not be a limited amount of space and housing, seating on these ships. Call her now. Don't wait until you see her and say, oh, hey, baby, I was going to call you. Start that relationship development process now so that when you do see her, him, them, you don't freak out. And that you know that they are the loving gods that every other culture adored and revered throughout history. They didn't have some idea of some guy in the sky. They made images of their gods. And you know what gods I'm talking about. They're the gods that have the cave painting Thoth, Hathor, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. The gods. They're real, they're here, they're now, but not forever. We do have a limited amount of time, and that's just a logical deductive reasoning understanding. As you see the escalation and the unraveling of our reality, if you're paying attention, and I know most of the people watching these videos are, you see that if you graph the changes and the escalating, accelerating changes that we're seeing happen, it's not much longer before life as we knew it no longer even closely resembles what it once did. Like I said in my previous video, you might as well consider yourself already on board the mothership, and at some point along the way, the world that we thought we knew and that we thought we lived in was replaced by the world that we now live in, and they are helping us come to the understanding of that by introducing these changes into our environment and our reality in order to acclimate us to the new environment and the new understandings, to mold our new self-image and worldview slowly in a way that we will be able to accept it and it doesn't send us into shock. But time is limited, because eventually it's time to rock the cradle of love. Because as I've said before, you cannot change a culture as one person, and the culture that is developed here has gotten to the point where very few people find God. Like Matt from Quantum of Conscience said in his video, The First Conversation After a Failed Life, that fewer and fewer people make it through the filtration process. And the warlocks, or whatever he calls them, actually tried to reverse the flow because they were violating some contract or whatever terms he put it in. But it's time to empty the petri dish out and reseed it so that people can have a happy life like we've all experienced. And as
including Joni Mitchell, Don't Interrupt the Sorrow. There will be links in the description referring to this divine feminine. This guy, I've only watched this single video of his, but clearly he's had a very similar experience to mine, including the muse messages he picks up on and the divine feminine. I haven't read this one yet, but I decided to upload this because it's about the fourth time this has come my way as confirmation. Today's upload by Jamie Lee covers the same thing. His story is over and her story is about to take its place. But he has a real problem with the Mormons and the Masons, and I'm not sure I'm with him on that bandwagon. I've spoken quite a few times about this feminine aspect of the spirit that resides with me. Synchronistically, these, Lady in Red, Moon Dance with Her Majesty, same thing, but Jamie Lee, A Plain Truth, his video today, referred to the natives that got slaughtered. I'm a product of the Mountain Meadow Massacre. To clarify, in this video, I'm showing you a Springville graveyard where there are burials of people who died in the Savage Wars and the Black Hawk Wars. But my great-great-great-grandpa was taken in by Native Americans after there was a slaughter known as the Mountain Meadow Massacre. And in my lineup, just beneath the one we just watched, is Loch Ness Mother Revelations Confirmed. Might want to check those out too. Or don't. Or don't. You can see those aren't clouds, right? Just from the thumbnail photo. And we are in the collective initiation. And Trump was right when he said nothing can stop what's coming, and he who can draw down fire from the heavens has arrived. Been here for quite some time.